Now, Nigerians are facing a challenging economic climate with rising inflation putting a strain on household budgets. And this has led to a surge in consumer credit, particularly personal loans. To understand this trend better, I'm joined by Oladipo Ajayi, Head of Fixed Income and FX Chapel Hill, Denham Securities. Thank you so much, Oladipo, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Leko, for having me on this morning.
All right. So according to reports, there is a significant increase in consumer credit, particularly personal loans, as I mentioned earlier. Can you explain the factors driving this trend beyond just inflation? And are there any demographic shifts or maybe changes in consumer behavior to consider? Or is it just about inflation?
Well, I think it's more of inflation. It's basically the prices of things in the market. If you remember, up to now, Labour and the government, they are still going back and forth on the new minimum wage. Since the removal of subsidy around this time last year, also the harmonization of the FX window, we're seeing that impacting prices of goods and services negatively. Prices have gone up aggressively. Even to some extent, you've seen prices of some products have gone up as high as 400%. And income has been stable. So it simply means that there had to be a way to actually augment. You have options of other cutting costs. And I'm sure a lot of households has gone as much as actually focusing only on the necessity. But the take home cannot even actually cater for the necessity. So as a result of that, they need to, just like the government, actually fund it in this deficit. Funding the deficit is what we're currently seeing now. Simply means that a lot of people have been meeting most of those banks to actually source for consumer loan just to actually cushion the effect of the negative funding.
And I guess that would actually speak to the fact that personal loans comprise nearly 80% of consumer credit now. But first, let's put it in a bit of perspective so that we all understand. I'd like you to differentiate between what we know as personal loans and retail loans. And two, what does this dominance of personal loans, 80%, what does it tell us about Nigeria's current borrowing needs compared to retail spending?
Well, for personal loan is basically for personal consumption. It's in base for cater for household needs. It's basically for and mostly you see some of those banks actually being very, very innovative around it. We've seen it. GT Bank, we see Access also playing a huge role in this segment. So what they do most times is that sometimes they give you upfront loan against salary, just to actually help you fund the gap between when you actually have between the time of need and when you're actually expecting cash flow. Basically, a personal loan is basically to actually fund personal expenses, like household things. But retail loans, basically, they are more like you want to buy cars, you want to buy something in the market, and sometimes you have capital needs, and also you can actually pay instrumental. So it basically means that you want to buy a car, you can pay for like a 4-year installment payment. You want to actually get home appliances, you can pay maybe 2-year installment payments. And so this is exactly what the difference between the two. But you can see clearly that the personal loan is actually the one that is taking a huge portion of this, because it is actually currently needed now as we speak in the country. A lot of people barely can actually, their take home can barely take them home. So they need to actually resort to like a short funding that can help them augment their take home. And that's one of the reasons why we have seen most of these loan app actually coming up aggressively now, because they've seen the opportunity that this brings to the table. And funny enough, the rates are not actually very friendly. I read that a particular loan app charges as much as 10% per month. That's like charging like 120% per annum on this thing. So, but basically, most of people that actually patronize this loan app, they don't actually look at it from that perspective. I need 100K and I need to pay 10,000 as interest on the 100K. So it's not something extraordinary to them, and they don't feel that something that will impact their finances aggressively. So that's exactly what it means.
And I guess that actually speaks to the desperation of people to try to live within the hike in the cost of living crisis that everybody's trying to grapple with. Let's look further now, Oladipo. Now, while consumer credit rises, we see that credit to key sectors like agriculture remains low, looking at around 3%, according to what we know. Now, isn't this a great concern for long-term economic growth and food security in the country? And by the time you talk about that, I'd like to also focus on what policy changes do you think can encourage more lending to this particular sector?
Well, sincerely speaking, is something that is actually that's very disturbing because if you look at what is currently happening now, food inflation is not of 40%, and so in such a time like this, you expect us to actually invest aggressively into agricultural sector in a way that that will actually improve the supply into the market. And currently, Nigerian inflation is two-sided, but I will make bold to say that close to 80% of it is coming as a result of the shortfall from the supply side. And and if by now we are not aggressively tackling that, it means that we are on a long haul. So by now, I expect the fiscal policy guys to actually to have risen to that occasion and aggressively be investing in the agricultural sector to ensure that we can actually improve food supply into the market, which in the long run will also reduce the personal loans that we have actually discussed about, because a lot of people, it's not that people are actually consuming more than what they used to consume, but what is happening is because the prices of what they used to consume is now twice that price now. So it means that maybe in a month you consume a cereal of a pack of cereal for maybe like 20,000 and now, but the same pack of cereal is now costing 60,000, and that's one of the reasons why people would need to do that. So it simply means that if the government actually if government has done the right thing by actually investing aggressively into the agricultural sector, we will start seeing the impact, and that will also dovetail into a better lifestyle for Nigeria. So I think the government needs to actually look at this sector better than the way they are currently looking at it. We need to actually go beyond the level of input and the level of education that the government is currently giving farmers to a better one. The government also needs to support beyond the funding. Also, the government needs to provide seedling as well, because at the same time, the quality of the seed is also a factor as well. And another thing also that we also need to consider is the fact of the storage. Because when you look at our production to storage, I think it's about 10%. And when you now look at countries like South Africa has like 120% of that, it simply means that they can actually store more than 100% of what they produce in a year. And we barely can store up to like 10 to 30% of what we produce in a year because we don't have storage capacity. And that's one of the reasons why at the end of the day, the yield from agricultural produce, we ended up losing close to about 60% of it due to the fact that there's no appropriate storage in that regard. So I think that the government needs to actually rise up to these challenges. We have seen some other private bodies. We have seen private market actually standing up in this regard. We have seen what Apex is doing in this regard. I also think that the government also needs to be deliberate about it so as to ensure that we can actually secure our tomorrow.
Okay, even as we wrap up on this particular conversation before we move to the next, now we know that inflation is biting hard. Households are struggling to meet up and they are trying to access whatever loans that they can get at whatever interest rate it will come. The same for businesses who are trying to also do the same. And in that mix, we also see the Central Bank of Nigeria raising interest rates to combat inflation. And of course, the government coming up with different policies that it can implement, economic reform reforms and all that. Now, are there complementary or other sort of monetary or fiscal policy tools that could address the situation, the economic situation that we are in? Because we are speaking about economic growth, welfareism for the people, businesses to thrive, but it seems as though it's a bit choky for everyone.
I think on the part of monetary policies, guys, I'm very sure they've almost exhausted what they have in their armory to actually actually curtail the aggressive inflationary pressure. I think everything has settled on the table of the fiscal policy, guys. Like I said, we need to be deliberate on how we actually handle some of these situations. The government needs to actually have specific industry that you are targeting, and you know the impact on the nation, and you're actually investing aggressively to actually protect the future of the country. We look at the oil and gas sector. Oil and gas sector, as you speak now currently, we are not producing to capacity. Currently, we have about 1.5 million barrel daily allocation from OPEC, and that is aside the normal condensate. So we barely can meet our quota, and as a result of that, we are not generating as much effect that would have expected. And so it simply means that on a daily basis, we are leaving revenue of like about 200,000 barrels on the table every day. And imagine if we are able to actually bring this into the coffer of the government, simply means that we have more effects to actually meet the need of the people. And what that would mean is that will drop the rate of naira to dollar, which in turn will actually reduce the impact of that on inflation. And aside that, also, like we have spoken about the agricultural sector, and also we need to also look at the mining sector as well. That looks like more like one of the feature of this country. That sector, we have left that sector actually lying for a long time. The government needs to invest aggressively into that sector. That will create employment for people, and aside that, that will also improve the capacity to actually generate revenue, and more of this will be more like FX revenue, which will also help to actually stabilize the country. So when the government is when they focus on some of these industries, and also with some of the policies that the central bank has actually shown out on the table. What the central bank has done is that to ensure that banks are actually very strong. As we speak now, most banks have been mandated to actually recapitalize to 500 billion capital base. So what that will mean is that improve their muscle to actually fund some of this obligation as well. So it means that government is doing their part. So on the part of the private individuals too, the banks can also come in that regard to actually fulfill their own duty in that regard. And by so doing, we can actually further improve the business activity in the country, and also improve growth, which in turn will lead to a better lifestyle for people.
Okay, well, we might have to now, at this point, look at the other side of this conversation, which has to do with Nigeria spending about $15 billion to service debt in 5 years. So, of course, we know Nigeria's debt burden has grown significantly in years, with debt servicing costs rising nearly 270% since 2019. So, Oladipo, we've seen that kind of significant increase in terms of debt. Is this trend sustainable in terms of the long term? What are the potential risks associated with such a high debt burden?
Well, for me, I feel that this is not sustainable, and Nigeria should not get to a point where I will now have to toe the line of Ghana, Kenya, Zambia, and the like. And now I felt we are supposed to learn from what has happened to to others, and actually internalize the lessons and see how we can make better situation. We can't continue to actually service debt with these huge numbers. And if you look at least sometime last year, we're doing close to about close to about 90% of our revenue. We are using that to actually service our debts. So it tells you the situation where we have found ourselves. So, and it also means that this is not a time that we need to aggressively continue to actually amass debt. It's a time where we need to sit down and see, well, what has been the impact of the previous loans that we are taking. What is the result of the utilization? And Nigeria should also look at it from this perspective that borrowing should be project based. It means that when you are borrowing, there must be specific reasons why you are borrowing, and that reasons must actually be catered with the borrowing. So it means that, for example, you are constructing, maybe you are doing more like a road construction, and you are borrowing. That borrowing should be targeted at that road construction, and because we know that at the end of the day, that will ease business activity, and at the end of the day, it will improve productivity, which in turn will actually also increase the tax that will come to the confine of the government. So one way or the other, it will be more like a win-win situation for both businesses and the government. But we can't continue to amass debt the way we have done in the past. This is a time
Oladipo,
for us to actually look at it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes, I'm actually glad that you are saying this and you're talking about this, because we've actually talked about this before, you and I, on this show, where I've asked you why the Nigerian government will secure loans and not expend it in the critical areas or sectors of the economy that actually transform the Nigerian economy. And I asked if you were actually confident about this administration in terms of spendings. Of course, in our earlier conversation, you talked about various sectors that investments are needed, most especially from government, or at most opening up those sectors to FDIs to come in. So I'm going to rephrase that question and put it back to you. From what you've seen so far, because it seems as though that securing loans from international bodies is not really a problem for this administration, both past and present. The issue is around spending. Where do these monies go to? So I'm going to ask you again, are you still confident about the spending pattern of this current administration in terms of where this money should be plugged? Because if we are to pay debt, we should be able to plug the monies in areas where we know that we are able to raise revenue to pay those debts, and that can help us balance in terms of what we get, what we spend, and how we're able to, move the money around the economy to increase productivity across that line. So are you still confident now?
Well, I think I should speak currently. I think I will sit on the fence as you speak currently. And one of the reasons why I'm saying that is that currently, when you look at where we are currently, I feel that we can do more than what we are doing. If you look at the debt data that was released by DMO earlier in the week, and what doing an analysis of it shows that one way or the other, the current government has been able to pay down reduce our foreign loans by about $1.04 billion. But they've been able to increase our domestic loan by about 8 trillion. And out of that 8 trillion, about 4.5 trillion was to actually repay ways and means. But the main thing is that the 4.5 trillion now is what we need to ask ourselves: what have we used the 4.5 trillion for? And I don't think we have seen the full impact of the borrowing already. As we speak, we are not seeing any great impact of just amassing the debt as we speak currently. And that's why I would say I moved from actually being on this side to actually sit on the fence on it. Because I won't totally say that they have thrown caution to the wind. Because one way or the other, the peculiarity of the time is also a factor that we also need to look at. It's a time where you need to actually develop the economy. But my own suggestion remains that whatever borrowing you are actually taking, we should actually look at the model for sukuk borrowing. Sukuk borrowing is for targeted projects, and that's one of the reasons when you drive past some places in Nigeria, you will see it. You will see the signboard there: Sukuk 1, Sukuk 2, Sukuk 3, Sukuk 4. It's telling you that the fund that they raise in Sukuk saving fund is used to fund this road project. And that makes a lot of sense. In the same vein, the government should actually borrow make their borrowings project based. So it simply means that if you want to raise money to actually develop the mining sector, you should target that mining sector borrowing. so that anybody that's actually subscribing to that knows that whatever I'm investing, where I expect my fund to actually go into be in the mining sector to actually develop that sector. And I think that should be the way forward. And before that, we used to have nomenclature for some of government borrowing as contractors bonds, contractor bond. So it's a way to tell you that, oh, this bond is for specific contractor and is based to actually for specific project. And I think we need to actually revert back to that model. What that would do to us is that it will help accountability. It will help us to actually be able to trace and actually bring government to book that, oh, you have raised money in this regard, but we are not seeing commensurate impact on that sector. And so you also make it easier for EFCC to actually want to actually look into some of these situations, because when the result does not commensurate with what you have taken as the input, then it needs for you to actually review and audit such.
Okay, so finally now, in the light of this rising debt burden and Fitch ratings predictions, now how concerned are you about investor confidence?
Well, even with all this, the investors still have great confidence in Nigeria, and we have sampled a lot of foreign guys, and they still have great confidence in Nigeria. But I just think feels that we should not get carried away with that. We should ensure, as a nation, to ensure that we are very prudent, and we should look more about our debt sustainability. That's very key, and Fitch actually highlighted that in their reports on Nigeria, and I think that the government will need to sit down and look at that very well. Again, we don't need to continue in a way where we will continue to do more like a budget where we'll have outrageous deficits. For example, this year now we are borrowing about 9 point something trillion to actually fund that budget deficit, and that is excluding the fact that the president is saying that they will be coming back with a supplementary budget. So we need to actually get our house in order to ensure that we don't fall into the same ditch that a country like Ghana and Zambia actually fell into. So because we are more like the giants of Africa, we are still one of the countries that most of these guys are looking at in Africa. So we should not actually betray their trust by actually throwing caution to the winds.
Well, before the end of this year, we'll find out if Nigeria will still be the giant of Africa, because, of course, you know that it has been predicted that the Nigerian economy will fall to the 4th position. And, of course, the South African economy will take the top spot. But then we're still looking at a trend to see how that will that would end up by the end of this year. It's a prediction, so we don't know what will happen. So, finally, Oladipo, before I let you go, now, you've talked about these loans and all that. Now, the World Bank loan and the 2024 budgets both highlight, that is Nigeria's 2024 budget, highlighted a focus on raising non-oil revenue. So for you, in about a minute or two, what specific policies or some sort of policy changes or reforms do you think that the government can implement if we are hoping to achieve this, in terms of objectives, diversifying the economy, improving the economy, moving away from the dependence on oil and seeing how we can look at other sectors and also improve the export indices?
Well, for me, I think the first thing we need to look at is creating an enabling environment. And I think that has been the key problems that Nigeria is currently facing. Now, we have seen a situation where many countries, many companies are actually leaving Nigeria. Just today, ShopRite is looking at closing their store in Abuja. And these are some of the problems, because currently the enabling environment is not there. So government needs to look at a way to ensure that there's security, and because I won't bring my money into a country where I know that my investment is not secure. I won't bring my money into a country where I know I can't just, in a GV, I can't just travel into such country. So the government needs to ensure that there's enabling environment. And the main thing also is that infrastructure is also very key. Because to be sincere, some of these industries or some of this sector is not the key responsibility of the government to actually invest aggressively in some of this sector. It's just for them to actually create policies that will attract foreign investors into that sector, or create policies that will attract private capital into those sectors. In this country, there's a lot of idle cash sitting across the country looking for investment destination. But the fear remains that Am I sure that when I invest in this sector, am I sure they will not come, that government will come and turn around things? So government need to be true to their work. Government need to improve on infrastructure. Government need to ensure that there's enabling environment for business to actually thrive. And finally, government need to ensure that there's security so that people can have confidence to actually bring their home into such environments.
Well, a lot of cards on the table for the Nigerian government. We just hope that they will play it and play it right. Oladipo Ajayi, Head of Fixed Income and FX, Chapel Hill, Denham Securities, thank you so much for your time on the show.
You're welcome. Thank you very much, Nico, for having me on.